there, it's Natasha, and thank you so much for joining me today. I wanted to show you another really fun technique that does not take many supplies at all. I call this the dipped technique because it looks like it's been dipped. However, I think this is just another version of watercolor techniques that you can do. Of course, you don't actually need watercolors. You can use any water reactive inks. I use those as watercolors all the time. Today, I am going to show you a few different options, but I'm going to start off with a Distress Oxide. This is the Picked Raspberry. I'm popping this down onto an acrylic block, just anything that I can pick up the ink from. If you have a re-inker, then pop some of that down too. If you have just normal watercolors, then of course I would put some out on an acrylic block. The idea is that we want to keep thinning down this color, and I'm only going to use one color for this technique. Now I'm starting off with some Tim Holtz watercolor paper. I am going to start off with an extra little puddle of water there, just out of my bottle. And I do have a non-stick sheet. This is just the little replacement mat from the glass media mat underneath there. I just like the mat by itself, and all I'm doing is spreading a very, very watered down light layer of that pink over about maybe just over 3/4 of my watercolor paper. I want to make sure that I leave some white, and that makes for our good starting contrast. So this is going to be the first color. Of course, you can wait for this to dry naturally, but I tend to use the heat gun because that means I don't have to walk away, wait for it to dry, and then come back. I can just pretty much keep going. Now, all we want to do here is add another layer, and we just want it to have slightly more ink, slightly more color, and slightly more depth to it. And again, you can put this on in any fashion you want. There's no rules as to kind of what lines you should follow. I myself like doing really kind of organic-y, wiggly lines. But of course, if you were to use some masking paper, then you could just get really, really straight lines. And I have done that before too. So whatever is working for you. Then I just, every time I add more color, I just make it a little bit stronger and a little bit stronger and a little bit stronger. And I tend to bring it down just a little bit because that way it's going to cover until the next color kind of kicks in. Then from here, I just wanted to wipe off that really watery kind of picked raspberry and put on some fresh, so it was going to be a really concentrated amount of that color. And this will mean that I can do the last layer down the bottom. And you can kind of see how it gradually gets a little bit darker each time, and this is why it reminds me of it being dipped. Of course, it actually hasn't, and you can actually dip paper, but this is just kind of doing the technique without having to do that technique, I guess. So here I'm putting on kind of full strength color, as full as I can kind of get it without very little water to make it move, and that is going to be our deepest, darkest line down the bottom. Now, I think overall, the lighter colors, and this one is kind of a medium, a mid color, but lighter colors are trickier to get lots of different layers because they already kind of start off light. So this is Cracked Pistachio, and this one is a little kind of heading towards the lighter colors. I would say something like if you were using a blueprint sketch or the likes of Chipped Sapphire, then this would be a whole lot easier because it's really easy to water down those colors, whereas when you already start with a light color, it can be tricky. But I will show you one little way that I tend to conquer that on this one here. Now I'm starting off with my lightest color, and again I'm going to stick with these kind of organic watercolor looking lines. To me, this is the look that I was going for today, and I'm going to show you two different ways to finish off these cards as well in this video. So I am using watercolor paper because we do end up putting quite a bit of media on here, and although we dry it every single time, it does get a little bit wet, but you could try it with normal paper, of course, depending on what media you're wanting to use, whether you wanted to even use watercolor pencils. You can use actual watercolors, you can use any water reactive inks you have. I have also done this using acrylic paints and just watered down those. Depending on what you have on hand, you can give it a go. Now I'm getting up to my third layer here, and honestly, my way to conquer this was to go and use the re-inker. The re-inker is obviously the most concentrated form of that ink that I am able to get. So when I add the last layer on here, you're going to see that it is really dark. And even though this is quite a light color, when you add so much of that re-inker, it's going to be a really nice dark version of that color. So I was able to get 4 different versions there without too much trouble at all. And I tend to find that for the lighter colors, 4 is about the right number. If it's a little bit darker, I can get 5, but this is just what works for me, depending on what you're using, I guess. And then I just wanted to quickly show you, I'm going to really speed through this one because it's essentially the same process, but you don't have to do it in kind of straight lines. This one I decided to do it in a kind of circular pond looking. And in fact, when this is finished, it ends up looking like a topography map to me, but that's all right. So I am just kind of reeling this in. Now this is the next layer where you can see I didn't dry that bottom left-hand corner, well enough. And you can see if you don't dry in between layers, it just kind of melds into the layer before it. It's going to blend rather than creating that kind of harsh watercolor line that we want. So you do need to make sure that you dry in between your layers. And again, I had to use the re-inker to get a darker version right there in the center. But I like this. It's just something a little bit different. And you just never know how you might kind of find a way to use that. So these are the 4 that I just made today. And again, these kind of remind me of hills, looking under the hills, or maybe the blue one looks a little bit like clouds. I think that you can kind of make it what you want, and I just want to show you a couple of nice quick options that you are able to use and turn these into cards with. This one from Stampendous is called the Big Floral Pop, and this kind of caught my eye a little while ago. I wanted to use this and just kind of haven't found the right card, but I thought today was the day. I have trimmed down my panel just a tiny little bit, so it is 4 by 5¼ inches at the moment. And here is where I decided to use some VersaMark, because I thought I would heat emboss this in white to make it sharp on that pink. And then it was kind of when I was doing this that I thought I could add a sentiment in at the same time, and I would also use VersaMark for that as well. So I got out these little spotlight sayings and picked one out that I thought looked good. I've been really enjoying these and using these a lot recently. So I picked out one and I'm going to pop it down. Now the lid on this stamping platform it has these like little springs in it, so you can kind of place it down and then push down on the stamp, which I absolutely love. But at the moment I have a rubber and then a photopolymer stamp in there at the same time, so they are different heights. So I need to make sure to take out the rubber stamp and then I'm able to stamp down the photopolymer one. And then when I was halfway through this, I was like, okay, I've just put a white sentiment on a white background. You can literally see the point where I realize what I've done, and you can tell that I am distracted and clearly probably talking to my children at this point. So I just wipe it off with a paintbrush before I am going to melt this. Now I could have added color around it to the back of it, but that kind of defeats the purpose of the whole dipped background. So I am going to work on that in just a minute, and instead I kept the sentiment in the exact same place, except for I used the picked raspberry in the Distress Oxide, so the exact same color that we actually did the original watercoloring with. And I'm just going to stamp that down a couple of times to have the happy birthday sentiment, and there it is all okay again. Now just to add a couple of little finer details, I'm going in quickly to the big flower in the center and just adding some little flicks in with a water brush, and again the same picked raspberry color, just to add a little bit of interest. I'm going to flick through this bit pretty fast because I think you get the gist of it. Then I'm also going to add in a tiny little bit of color to a couple of those leaves up there, and again this just helps it kind of stand out. I really don't want to cover up the background though, because obviously that is kind of the shining portion of this card as well, and so I just want to make a little bit of detail but without taking away completely from the background. So you can see that that little extra bit of color kind of brings out particularly those top leaves there nicely. I'm going to add this on with some Ranger Multi-Medium in the matte finish. That's the glue that's inside this little glue bottle. And I'm going to pop this down onto a 4¼ by 5½ inch card base. And then give it a nice little press because lots of those inks are still wet. So I just turned it over. And that is the first card. Now the second card that I've got here that I'm going to show you, I'm going to kind of speed through this process, and actually I already made up this little tractor. Very, very simple to put together. I just use red and plain craft cardstock, and then I inked up some of the pieces. This little set here from Elizabeth Craft Designs is called Tractor. I am going to pop some acetate behind the window for the window in the tractor, and I just like adding these extra little touches. It was actually when my husband picked up this card, it was the first thing he said. He said, "Oh, I like that you put the window in the tractor." So then I add the little steering wheel, and it's really nice to know that people notice those kind of little details that we do. So it's definitely worthwhile to me rather than just having it see-through. And I am going to again take the all the birthday stamp set from Concord and 9th and stamp out a big happy birthday. I have someone in mind for this one, so this was kind of for a child, a young boy, and so this worked out perfectly. So I'm going to have a big happy birthday. I decided to actually center it up right in the middle. I have this in my stamping platform and it is now available again. I will leave links to that down in the description box below this video. And I also put these Sizzix sticky grid sheets in there. I get lots of questions about this, and it just means that I don't have to use magnets at all anymore because the sticky grid holds it in place perfectly. I also hold down the sticky grid sheets with a little bit of washi tape around the outside, and that just keeps it in place nicely. So once I have stamped this out with some VersaFine Onyx black ink, it is a really crisp, beautiful, dark stamping ink. So I love the result there. Really, really simple. And again, I'm just going to pop this little tractor down. His little mud flaps are dimensional. They have a little bit of foam behind them, but the rest of him is going to pretty much stay flat. This card will need to go through the mail, so it is going to work out perfectly. I put my little card front down on my 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base, add my tractor, and he's just going to go front and center, and that is both of my cards finished for today. So I hope that you have enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, if you have given this technique a go before, or which mediums you prefer to use when you do use this technique. It is a really fun one, really simple, and you don't need too many supplies to give this a go at all. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.